Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and to another edition of the Kalb Report, a monthly public policy forum co-sponsored by the George Washington University, the National Press Club, and the Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. I'm Marvin Kalb, a senior fellow at the Shorenstein Center, and our topic is the impact of talk radio on the 2004 presidential campaign. This program is being carried by XM satellite radio across the nation, WRC radio here in Washington, and PBS Channel 32, also here in Washington. The Kalb Report is underwritten by the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. Did you know that millions of Americans, many, many millions of Americans, tune into talk radio every day? Is it for news, information, gossip? Do they want to be entertained? Do they want their political opinions confirmed by politicians seeking votes, writers promoting their books, or journalists pronouncing their views on who's up and who's down and why? Whatever their motivation, they are tuning in, and talk radio is, I assume, having an impact. But what kind of an impact and in what way? I've invited three prominent talk show hosts to join me and to give their views, which I'm sure they will, even if I didn't ask. They are to my right, and that is a purely geographic distinction. G. Gordon Liddy, who has been hosting his national program for more than a dozen years. He's the author of 4 books, numerous articles. He is very conservative and very controversial. Because of his role in the Watergate scandal, he served almost 5 years in prison before President Jimmy Carter commuted his 20-year sentence. To my left is Al Franken, who was relatively new to the talk show business. He launched his program earlier this year, March 31st, I believe, as a major part of an effort by Air America Radio to counter what was seen as the conservative tilt in talk radio. Franken is one of the creators of Saturday Night Live, author of 4 bestsellers, and winner of 5 Emmy Awards. And seated to my right, Jim Bohannon, Jimbo to his friends, one of the nation's top radio personalities. His national program is heard on about 350 stations. Bohannon is a 45-year veteran of this radio business, as good a pro as one can find, who likes to position himself in the middle of the political spectrum in talk radio. He calls himself a militant moderate. Okay, gentlemen, we're in the final stages of the presidential campaign, what President Bush has called the sprint to the finish line. What impact, my first question is, has talk radio had on this campaign, bearing in mind that according to a recent MediaMark survey, talk radio listeners are 88% educated, affluent, and white, 63% male, and 54% apt to describe themselves as very conservative. And that is more than the national description of itself, which is just conservative. And so what impact have you had? Let's start with Gordon Liddy.
Okay, well, the first thing I want to do is to apologize to everyone for ruining their evening, because I'm going to make a confession. Al Franken and I are friends. We've known each other for years. I've been on his program. I've been a guest in his home. And Al will confirm this for you. My name is on the wall in his bathroom. Isn't that correct?
I have his Jimmy Carter color Xerox of the commutation.
What impact has talk radio had on the campaign?
Okay.
Why does it say for a good time?
No. I think it's had a significant effect. I would not call it impact, because impact means violent contact if you look it up. We haven't had any violent contact, but we have had a strong effect. And the reason I say that is when, for example, the Swift boat veterans book came out, a member of the Kerry campaign, an aide, said to someone else, "Don't worry about this thing, it's not going anywhere, the press is with us." Well, guess what? Talk radio was probably the most significant thing in getting that book out.
But that suggests that talk radio is part of the press.
Yes,
Is that what you consider it to be?
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
It's that and more. I remember you're saying, well, what about other things? And certainly, you have to be entertaining. If you're not entertaining, nobody's going to listen to you. And so you've got to inform and educate, and you also have to entertain.
Okay,
And so that's
so
one of
you-
the reasons for the success of Al's program. He's very entertaining.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Effect on the campaign.
I don't know what our effect has been.
I know
I
there's a
know-
big difference between effect and impact. One
Yeah,
is
well,
violent.
I didn't want to presume to correct your use of the language, Marvin, like my friend G would. And we're such good friends, I can call him G.
That's right.
Well, you got two G's, actually.
Yes.
I don't know what the impact of our show is. I know we're in a lot of the swing states, and this is going to be an incredibly close election. And if it's as close as last time, everyone has an impact. I know this. I know that right-wing radio, and the reason Air America got on the airwaves is to just get a foothold to counter this enormous right-wing terrain. And I'll give you an example of how right-wing radio has affected this election, probably, and just discourse in general. 62%, this is according to a Gallup, recent Gallup poll, 62% of Republicans believe that Saddam had something to do with planning 9/11. Okay, now this is something that's demonstrably false, that the president has said is not true, that Colin Powell said is not true, that Dick Cheney lied about in the debate because it's been so discredited. He said, I never made that connection. And of course he had. He said many times that Mohammed Atta had met in Prague with Iraqi intelligence. Now, why do 62% of Republicans believe this? Because they're stupid? Maybe. Because they listen to right-wing radio? I think that's part of it. I'll give you one example, and I know I don't want to dominate time. Rush Limbaugh a couple months ago, the one that the guy that more people listen to than anyone else, on the radio said they were discussing minimum wage, something Democrats are for raising, something that Republicans generally are against raising. He said, 75% of people on the minimum wage in this country, my friends, are teenagers in their first job. Well, I heard that, and I said, okay, that's not true. And went to one of my researchers and said, would you look it up? So he went to something called the Bureau of Labor Statistics and found out that 68.1% of people on the minimum wage in this country are adults. So where did Rush Limbaugh get this statistic? Well, he got it directly from his butt. And
Hold it.
it went right from his butt, out his mouth, through the airwaves, into the brains of ditto heads who believe that 75% of all Americans on the minimum wage are teenagers in their first job. And
So you're
this is-
saying that there is, on the part of conservative talk radio, a very considerable impact, and you're ascribing that, what, principally to Rush Limbaugh?
well, Rush and others who do this thing, it's called, oh gosh, what's that word? Lying. Lying. And Rush
Okay.
Limbaugh does it all the time, and
Jim Bohannon, you are the militant
Yes, I.
moderate in this group. Help me out. The impact on this campaign.
There is some impact, not as much as we often like to think. Sometimes we start reading our press clippings. For example, in 1994, there would have been a Republican revolution, but there were a few people who ran out in front of the parade and yelled, "Follow me." We have an impact, I think, in a couple of areas. For one, we probably do tend to validate the views of people who listen to our programs. Therefore, the more views presented, the more impact we're having, and the addition of people like Al will extend that impact. I think also we have an impact in that we probably add to those in the national political dialogue who really wouldn't be interested in just meet the press, face the nation kind of rational analysis. There are a lot of people who have to have their politics in the form of rhetorical wrestling, and we provide that. So those are the two impacts. I don't think that we are crucial, but as Al noted, in a very tight election, almost anybody can be the difference.
Right. Al Franken, if talk radio is, as you described it, this conservative mountain, the Alps of conservatism, you are, as a liberal then, kind of blowing into the wind. I mean, how do you even get your point of view across? I mean, you're very funny and you're very talented and bright and you write nice books, but how do you get your view across on talk radio if most of it is conservative?
Well, because we have added listeners and stations. We started with about 6 stations.
What do you
we
got
have
now?
36 now. We,
you got 36, and G. Gordon Liddy has how many?
Couple of hundred.
Couple of hundred. 350 for Jim Bohannon.
Yeah.
Right?
All right.
We've been around for 6 months.
Right.
But we've, we're adding big markets. We have Philadelphia at swing state. We have Columbus in that swing state.
What
We
about
have
Washington,
Minneapolis.
D.C.?
We don't have Washington, D.C. yet.
Chicago?
Don't have Chicago.
Dallas?
No.
Atlanta?
Yes.
You got
You want me
Miami?
to tell you the cities, or we have Miami. We have Miami. We could go on all night.
No, I don't want to.
We
I know
have
you can.
Minneapolis. We have San Francisco. We have San Diego.
San Diego.
We have a lot. Denver. Denver's a swing.
Good. Thank you. I got the idea.
May I interject something here?
Gordon, yes,
okay,
please.
you're saying that here's poor Al facing this mountain of right-wing radio. And I remember when Al let me in on the fact that he was going to be doing what he's doing, and I said, Al, you're going to have a problem. And he said, well, what's that? And I said, all your competition in liberal radio, ABC, NBC, CBS, PMS, CNN, and all of them, the whole bunch of them, that's all liberal.
Let me ask you, you mentioned before this business about the swift boats, the veterans.
Yes.
And when they came out with a series of political ads in August, they had come out a little before that, but there was a buildup in August. And you implied very strongly that you and people like you had a meaningful effect on the political campaign. And there's no doubt that Senator Kerry's numbers began to dip during that time. What do you guys, do you all get up in the morning, all of the conservatives, and sort of decide what it is that you're going to do that day? Who tells you to go and use the swift boat ads?
It's like black people and Jews. We all know that all the Jews and all the black people get up in the morning and phone each other and decide what, all black people and all Jews are going to say and think. And we do the same thing.
Do you really do that?
Well,
How do you
and I
do it?
call
I mean,
each other.
this is a serious question.
No.
It's a serious question.
No.
How do you get the word, the message that the swift boat ads are what you want to fasten yourself onto?
Well, first you read the book. Then you get Mr. Corsi, who is the co-author of the book, to come on the show and
Did you read the
discuss
book?
Yes,
What did you think
absolutely.
of it?
I thought it was very, very well documented. Very well documented.
Oh my God.
Did you find any
my
factual errors in it?
I thought it didn't really go far enough. I thought that they...
The Pentagon said that it was filled with untruths.
Well,
Would the Pentagon be supporting? It works for a Republican administration.
the Pentagon works, as you say, for a Republican administration. And I think that the Republican administration, that of George Bush, was very smart. They said, look, we accept the honorable service of the opponent. We're not going to question that and anything like that. And that was a smart move, just as calling into question the sexual preference of Mary Cheney was a dumb thing to do.
He didn't call into question her sexual preference.
He stated
Cheney had thanked Edwards. That's a phony issue. And the Swift boat thing is a smear. John McCain said it was a smear. He said it was dishonest and dishonorable. And this is what the Bush people do. And this is what right-wing radio does. And I'm sorry, I've been on Gordon's show and we're friends, but we're not that good of friends. and there's a reason this guy was in prison.
Hold it.
Now, Nightline just did a piece, went to Vietnam, talked to villagers who were there. These guys were under fire. They were under fire when he got his bronze. He didn't, you know, this, let me talk about one aspect of this. When he wins his silver, okay? This is a silver medal honor, a bronze star, 3 Purple Hearts. In the silver, when he won his silver, they're going upriver, they get ambushed, he turns the boat in, they got 50mm gun on top of the pilot house. They're firing at these guys, they beach the boat. There's a guy with a grenade, shoulder-launched grenade launcher, thank you. Shoulder-launched grenade launcher, okay. Anyway, so he is going to turn around to fire it to kill all the guys in the boat, and Kerry kills them. Now, what do the Swift boat guys say? Oh, they say, oh, it was a teenager in a loincloth. Well, no. And that he was running away and Kerry shot him in the back. And I'm sorry, but I didn't know it was against the rules to shoot someone running away from you in the back, which he didn't do, by the way. Every guy on the boat who was an eyewitness to this said the guy turned around, was an adult, and was dressed like VC. But wait a minute. I want to say something, Marvin. This is a disgrace. This is a disgrace. This is a hero. This is a hero, and they are smearing him.
Come on.
Okay.
No, it's okay. Now,
No,
wait a
it is
minute.
not okay.
No, it's not okay.
My turn.
He's the moderator.
My turn.
No, as a matter of fact, actually,
My turn.
Okay, I'm your
if
guest.
If there is
I
a
understand
I'm your
turn,
that.
guest.
Yes.
Now, I want to say
No,
one
but
thing.
if there is a
You've already
turn,
said yours.
it's my turn.
It is yours.
Who cares? I mean, look,
I care.
the best
I care.
available evidence we have is that both of these gentlemen served their country and were honorably discharged. Are there questions about where George Bush spent the time in Alabama?
Oh.
Yes, there are. Are there questions of how much of a hot dog John Kerry was? Yes, there are. And are there questions of how he got these various wounds? Yes, there are. I don't care. I will be casting my vote based on John Kerry's 20 years in the Senate and George Bush's 4 years in the presidency. And this entire debate is pointless, except that it fills a lot of airtime.
Gordon,
Okay.
when you were speaking before about the Swift boats, I want to be clear about one thing. I'm going to ask this, that it may be offensive, and I don't mean it that way, but you knew what you were talking about. That is to say, you had read the book, you had checked with the Pentagon to see that everything that they said about Lieutenant Kerry was accurate or
I
inaccurate
hadn't
in your
checked with the
point of view.
Pentagon. I had seen the reports of what the Pentagon said.
All right.
which
So
were
you
in the
were
press.
aware that the United States government said that what was in that book and in those ads was inaccurate.
No, what the United States government said was that the procedures followed with respect to the issuance of the medals had been correct. Now, if you go to Mr. Kerry's website, or if you did when I went, you'll see that he boasted that he had the Silver Star with Combat V. Now, first of all, the Silver Star has never had a letter designation on it at all. And combat is spelled with a C, not a V. There
Maybe
was no such medal. Now, with respect to the first Purple Heart, what he did was discharge an M79 too close to some rocks. He had an unintended, self-inflicted wound.
How do you know
that was a sliver, because it's in the medical reports. And he went to...
You saw the medical reports.
The medical reports are in the book. And he went to...
And you believe what is in the book?
Yeah, he went to...
Okay.
He went to the medical people and had himself treated, and then he asked for a Purple Heart. He was denied.
Asked for a Purple Heart?
He was denied the Purple Heart, and he went to his commander.
But he already had 3.
His commander, no, this is his first one we're talking about.
But he ended up with 3. Would they have given him the first if he didn't deserve 3 later?
Let me answer. He asked for the Purple Heart. The medical guy said no, because it requires that you have to be require treatment by a physician. He didn't. It was a sliver. Second, he went to his commanding officer. The commanding officer said no. He waited until those people were rotated out. Then he went and applied for it again.
According to the book.
And they gave it to him.
So what you're doing is
So the first one
how many
alone
programs did you do on this, by the way?
I have not counted the programs.
A lot of them?
A lot of them.
A lot of them.
A lot of them.
Okay. Let me move on. In 1992 and again in 1996, the impact of talk radio, largely spurred by the prominent role that Rush Limbaugh played in those two campaigns, was quite noticeable, quite enormous, as a matter of fact. I don't have a sense that the same thing is happening right now in the 2004 campaign. Do you have a feeling, Jim, that in terms of, I'm going to your historical experience now, that in 92, 96, the impact of talk radio was significantly different from what you've got now?
I think what was different was that we didn't see it coming back then. It was a big deal back then because it was new. I suspect the impact is at least as big now. There are more talk stations. There are certainly a lot more talk programs. There's a bigger talk audience today. So I would imagine the impact is bigger, but now we expect it. So it's simply a case of expectations.
Al Franken, when you took over this program on March 31st, when you launched the program, I read that one of the things that you said to your group is George Bush is going down, quote unquote. You don't make any pretense, do you, about being fair and balanced?
No, I'm actually fair. I'm fair and unbalanced.
And unbalanced.
I'll tell you why. I mean, and again, I go to the Limbaugh thing. When we make errors on our show, we correct them.
Right.
We are absolutely scrupulous about our facts. And I think that's a difference between us and right-wing radio in general. I have to say that this Swift boat, and I don't want to dwell on it, Jim, but it has to do with, I believe, the character of the Bush people. I believe this is a smear that is financed by people in Texas who are close to Karl Rove. I believe this is part and parcel of what they did to John McCain. I believe that they are vicious. I believe that the Bush people are as vicious as we've seen in politics. When they were doing push polls against McCain, saying that, we're an independent polling company and we're doing a poll here in South Carolina, and if you knew that John McCain was a cheater and a liar and had fathered an illegitimate Negro child, would you be more likely to vote for him or less likely to vote for him?
Please.
Wait a minute, you can't tell him not to laugh. You can tell him not to applaud, but if you're starting to tell him not to laugh, I'm leaving.
Yeah, that's because we got 3 people up here. No,
They don't
these
laugh
guys.
to them.
No. They're not as funny as you are. You know that.
Thank you. Finally.
Okay.
Fine.
Jim Bohannon, really, in a hysterical way, tell me. I mean, everything about this election is very funny. Do you guys consider yourselves journalists?
I do, both by the way I conduct my program and by the fact that I have an extensive background that includes reporting. And I do a news program every morning as well as a nighttime talk show. So I do consider myself a journalist, yes.
Gordon, do you consider yourself a journalist?
Well, yes, but I've written for Harper's and for the New York Times review of books and things of that sort. Part of my program, I would say yes. Other parts are entertainment, and other parts is strictly educational and
Which are the parts that are
we get
political, for example?
Well, these days, it's pretty much all political.
Political,
I mean,
okay.
we're coming up to an election.
Okay.
And that's, I mean, if I were to be talking about, I don't know, the SEC or something, I mean, I wouldn't have any audience left. So it's politics.
Do you believe that?
But I'll say this.
Go ahead.
That, when I don't forge documents and try to pass them off as real as some people on the left, not radio, do.
I have no idea who you mean.
Of course not.
One thing, Gordon, we are principally the op-ed page, with a little bit of the front page and a little bit of the cartoon page. But mostly, if you're going to make press comparisons, we're the op-ed page.
Okay, fair enough. I want to get back to something Gordon said a moment ago. If you're invited to contribute a piece to a magazine, and you do that, and if you write a book and you've done that for them, in your mind, does that make you a journalist?
Well, two of the books certainly don't make me a journalist because they were thrillers. I mean, they're flat out fiction. Good. That doesn't make me a journalist unless I'm working for CBS. So,
That's funny.
you heard it from the master.
We have his blessing.
We heard it from the master.
That's a
You
joke.
are officially anointed as funny.
But for example, in 1989, I wrote a piece for Omni magazine. It was called Memo to the President, and it was put on the cover. And what it did was predict terror attacks against the United States. And I'm sorry I put in as much good information in there as I did.
Was that President Bush?
No, this was 89. Who was president? Whoever was president.
I thought it was
First
President Bush.
Oh, the other Bush, yes.
Yeah.
In any event, what I did was point out that there's two railroad bridges that you can sever east of the Mississippi, and you'll stop all rail traffic from north and south east of the Mississippi in the United States. One team of 12 people, knowing what I know, could in one night sever sufficient pipelines to deny all natural gas to the entire southeast of the United States. And I put all that in there, and I just hope that the terrorists never get a hold of that magazine.
But
That's
isn't
journalism.
it interesting that
That's
you
journalism.
wrote it? So would you consider that a patriotic act on your
No, it was a
part?
piece of journalism.
That was journalism?
Yes, I was warning people about how
Was this
vulnerable this
based
country
upon
is.
any investigation
Yes.
that you had done at the area?
I did a
Yeah.
lot of investigation.
Okay, good. Do you consider yourself a journalist, Al Franken?
No.
Okay, what do you consider yourself, a humorist?
Yes.
I mean, tonight you have clearly established yourself on that.
Thanks again.
You're very welcome.
I consider myself an advocate. But I consider myself an advocate who uses journalistic tools. I can't emphasize this enough. We, on my show, are absolutely scrupulous about our facts. And I don't throw around stuff that just ain't true. And a lot of what we do is debunk what we hear from the right. Now, so I don't consider myself a journalist. I consider myself an advocate. I think a journalist is fair and is balanced, ironically. I don't pretend to be that.
Jim, is there any danger in your mind that the public, in listening to Gordon Liddy, Al Franken, yourself, is there a danger that they will think that you are journalists and therefore come to accept and believe more or less what it is that you broadcast?
It's more than a danger, it's an outright fact. Many people will tell you they, quote, get their news from talk radio, which is, again, like turning to the op-ed page to get your news. I've always favored a lockbox on your newspaper. You shouldn't even be allowed to turn to the op-ed page till you have read at least the first paragraph of every story on the front page so that you've got some idea of what the hell it is that you're about to form an opinion about. But we go around that step now. Mostly people want their opinions validated, and they want someone who agrees with them, who will tell them, yes, you're right, yes, you're right, yes, you're right, so that we can become among the most informed and least thinking people in all of history. And there's something inherently wrong with that.
I totally agree with you, but why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that has happened?
Because it makes money. Pandering always makes money. When you give people what they want, when you say, you're right, you're absolutely correct, people tune in. If people tune in, then we can charge higher rates for our advertising. It's a money-driven thing. As long as you pander, you will never lose money.
Gordon Liddy, did you get into this business to pander?
No, I got into the business because I was made an offer I couldn't refuse. Let me explain what I mean.
They came to you?
No, yes, and here's what happened. I had a wonderful life. I wrote books, I did magazine articles, and I gave speeches, and I could live in my two homes and do whatever I wanted to. But when you do that, you get a fat chunk of money, and you don't know when the next fat chunk of money is coming along. And
It's called freelancing.
So your wife has, yes, your wife has to stretch it out and so forth. And so when Mel Karmazin called Ken Stevens and said, I'm listening to Gordon Liddy sit in for a talk show host up here in New York, and he's doing a good job, and you've got a hole down there, why don't you put him in down there? They offered me this job, and I went home and I said to Mrs. Liddy, what do you think? And she said, I've got just one question. And I said, what's that? She said, do you get a regular paycheck? I said, yes. She said, you are taking that job. So that's how it got me. And I just want to make this observation. Please. The front page of the New York Times is the op-ed page of the New York Times.
No, it's not.
No, I don't think so at all.
Any more than the
I know
front
you
page of
disagree.
The Washington Times is.
No. Front page of the New York Times, op-ed page?
No,
You
I
see
think
a
the New York
difference,
Times, I see it very differently. I think the New York Times dropped the ball in the lead up to the war. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And they've done a mea culpa on that, so did the Washington Post. I think the mainstream media in this country has so internalized the criticism of the right that the right wing has built up this infrastructure for the last 40 years. And that's part of what Air America is trying to counter. And the mainstream media has so internalized this that they're scared of their own shadows. And they dropped the ball in the lead up to this war. The only people who did any real good journalism on the weapons of mass destruction was Knight Ridder, because they don't have a paper in Washington, they don't have a paper in New York, and they didn't have and this isn't my observation, this is the observation of Michael Massing, who made this in the New York Review of book. And by the way, I want to say one other thing about journalists. One way in which I'm not a journalist, but journalists serve their audience. Right-wing talk and a lot of right-wing Fox manipulates their audience. And I try to serve my audience. But I really believe that the mainstream media, like the New York Times and like the Washington Post, blew it in the lead up to the war because they have so internalized this criticism from the right that there is a liberal media, which I think is totally bogus. That's a lot of what my book was about. In my book, I said there are other biases in the media. Get it, there's PAC journalism. There's get it first instead of get it right. There is, controversy. There's definitely a bias toward horse race and process. The asking whether there's a liberal or conservative bias to the mainstream media, like the New York Times, is like asking whether the problem with Al-Qaeda is whether they use too much oil in their hummus. You might think their hummus is too oily. I might think it's too dry. But the problem is with Al-Qaeda is they want to kill us.
Okay. You've been very critical and articulate.
I'm sorry.
You've drawn a number of laughs.
I'm sorry.
So you should be very happy with that, okay? Now, what would you have done, hot shot, as we say? What would you have done in the lead up to the war? How would you have done it differently?
On the front page,
How would you have done it differently on your program as a talk show host?
If I had a program then?
Yeah.
We would have been talking to the journalists who were actually getting the story. And the story was...
But you're saying that most of them didn't get the story.
But some did.
And you would have just talked to them.
And I wouldn't have put, the New York Times put on page 16 any times there was any doubts about anything. I would have gotten the people who were talking about, these aluminum tubes, they're not right for centrifuges. It took, Bart Gellman and Walter Pincus got it like about 6 months after we went to war. But other guys were, I'm telling you, Knight Ridder.
Pincus had the story.
And they killed it.
The story, they did kill it. He had the story before the United States went to war in Iraq. Before. And Bob Woodward has spoken about that, and he has said himself that he wishes that he had done much more about it. Feels
If I had been on the air
that.
on the time,
Okay.
I would have been giving, people who were casting doubt on the intelligence that we were being fed by the New York Times and by the Washington Post.
Okay, Gordon.
And I would have
Let's say for a moment that you had found out prior to the time that the U.S. actually went to war that the U.S. was going to go to war. and you knew the date, you knew when the attack would begin, would you have put that on the air?
Certainly not.
You would not have put it on the
No,
air?
one of the people killed would have been my son, Lieutenant Colonel Ray Liddy of the United
Okay.
States Marine Corps, 2nd
Okay.
Battalion, 23rd Marines, who was over there.
Right, so that you're making a distinction between what it is that you do put on the air. And part of that, as you acknowledged before, is to be entertaining.
Yes. Is to say things in
Supposing
an
your
entertaining
political
way.
views were, however, not entertaining, rather serious stuff, and you began to be serious for a period of time, would you be dragged into the entertainment business by the people who are funding you, or?
No, certainly not. I work for Westwood One, and
they would never-
they do not in any way.
Interfere with editorial
No,
content?
I have never, ever, in all the years I've been.
And you work for
He works for
Westwood
Westwood
as
One.
well.
They don't do that. They do not do that. But what I'm talking about when I say entertainment, anybody who's ever been to college knows that there are professors who can take a dry subject and who
make
can
it
liven it up and make it, and there's professors who can take an extremely interesting subject
And
and
make
put
it-
you to sleep like that.
Absolutely.
And-
I've met some of them.
Right.
I've met
Well, I
some
mean,
of
that's
them.
what I'm
Absolutely.
talking about.
Okay. Let me just remind our radio audience that you are listening to the Kalb Report, and my guests are Jim Bohannon, Al Franken, and G. Gordon Liddy, three top talk show hosts. Gentlemen, to get a sense of the differences among you, let me mention a number of stories, and you tell me whether you have spent a great deal of time talking about these stories, why you have spent a lot of time, what kind of bounce you're getting on them. We've already discussed the swift boats, so I want to do that. But I do want to mention the bulge. Some of you may remember that there was this shadow on the back of the president's jacket, deemed to be some sort of bulge, deemed to have something under his jacket anyway, on the night of the first debate. So I'm wondering, Jim Bohannon, you covered that. You've talked about that, right?
We mentioned it. We didn't do much with it.
You didn't do much with it.
No, because we didn't have much to go on, other than the fact I made a few cracks about it, and then we just went on. And I think maybe one or two callers brought it up, but
Okay.
short of knowing what was there was not much
Not
to
that
talk
much.
about, really.
Al, what about you? Did you spend much time on that?
We did spend some, it was a visual joke. I was acting as if I was getting it. We did a sketch. We did a sketch in which we had a guest who was explaining that it wasn't a receiver from the Republican National Committee, and he himself was wearing a receiver. And then we found the guy who was feeding him the information, and it turned out he had a receiver too. So we made light of it.
You made light of it, and you did that in one broadcast, and that was it?
Yeah. We might have mentioned it a couple times, but we didn't make that big a deal about it.
Not a big deal. What about you, Gordon?
You have to understand that I got a 20-year prison sentence behind things like that, so I had to be very, very careful.
Right.
But we mentioned it, and we called it the Battle of the Bulge, and then it just died because there wasn't any follow-up information.
Died, but did you have it on a couple of days in a row? Did you talk about it?
No. I mean,
No.
when it first came out as part of the news, I mentioned it and what have you, and we were hoping we'd hear more about it, but we didn't.
And we didn't. All right, let's move on then. What about the comments by Senator Edwards and Senator Kerry about Vice President Cheney's daughter being gay? Jim Bohannon, did you deal with that story, and in what way?
We did deal with it. We brought it up, and we talked about whether or not that any of this was a cheap shot or not. The bulk of my audience felt that it was a cheap shot.
When you do that kind of thing, by the way, do you sort of raise the idea in the audience mind that this probably is a cheap shot? Because it could be viewed in a totally different way, as you know.
Well, coming at the end of the broadcast day, I'm able to say that what's been said during the past day on much of conservative talk radio has been that it was a deliberate cheap shot.
Okay,
Do
and
you
then-
happen to agree with that assessment?
Okay.
Amazingly, they always seem to.
They always seem
They
to.
always seem to. But yeah, I'll pose it in that form, or maybe for devil's advocacy, I'll say, was it not, in fact, a perfectly honest thing to say? She is a lesbian.
Right.
Therefore, what cheap shot can be involved in this? I'll phrase it in whatever way I think will be most likely to provoke reaction.
Gordon Liddy, how did you handle that story?
I read the news account of it, including the fact that Senator Kerry said, I didn't mean it that way. And then I said to the audience, what do you think? We're going to take a break now for some commercial messages, 1-800-GG-LIDDY. We'll come right back after these words, and I'll take your call. And they poured in.
And it was just that one day that you did that?
Yeah, one day I did that, although I have received incoming calls since, sporadically, saying, I think that was a terrible thing for them.
So that was sort of a one-day story in your life?
Pretty much.
Pretty much? Al Franken?
Well, I talked about it today just in reference to the fact that when Alan Keyes, candidate for senator in Illinois, said that while I was at the Republican convention, called the vice president's daughter a selfish hedonist. They didn't complain at all.
Who's the they here?
The Cheneys. I thought this was fake indignation when John Edwards spoke about it. The vice president thanked him.
And then quickly moved on.
And, well, thanked him and didn't have any other comment about the amendment to ban gay marriage because he disagrees with the vice president. And what John Edwards had said was that the amendment was there purely for political purposes. And there wasn't anything Cheney could say because that's why it's there. So he had no response. But he did thank Edwards for being so kind in the way he talked about how they had embraced their daughter and their daughter being a lesbian. And there's no shame in being homosexual. And maybe that is a difference between the cultures. And maybe that's why people on the left see it differently than people on the right. People on the left, when I saw that debate, I thought he was talking in the context of what we've already seen in this campaign, which is the vice president. That was the warmest moment in the Edwards-Cheney debate. Remember when Cheney said that he had never met Edwards before?
Yes.
Lying. Remember when he said he had never connected 9/11 to Saddam? Lying. That was a nice moment, though. He wasn't lying. And I thought that Kerry had brought that up in the context of that, which is that the Cheneys have bring it up themselves. And so I thought this was the most disingenuous moral indignation that I've ever seen. That's wrong. That's an exaggeration.
Was this expressed just once today on the program and that was it?
I think
or did
so.
you deal with it on several days?
I might have done it also on Friday, but I can't remember, frankly.
Okay. Bill Sapphire, the New York Times columnist, says that Kerry should apologize for what it is that he said. Do you think, Gordon Liddy, that he should?
Well, I think he should, but I don't think he will. And further to what my friend Al was talking about, what happened was the vice president, he made that quick remark, turned over the remaining 80 seconds of his time. He didn't want to discuss it anymore because, as he has said, two things. One, he and the president disagree on that issue. And the president sets the policy for the administration, so he didn't want to discuss it anymore because he disagrees on it.
It was the remaining 20 seconds of his time.
80.
20. 80. It was he had spoken on it first and went to Edwards and then went back.
It was a 30-second deal.
Yeah, it was a 30-second response.
That's right. The president says that
we're just very scrupulous.
The president said that Senator Kerry had gone over the line. It's not a surprise that he said that in the course of a political campaign. But Jim Bohannon, would you, one, think that it was over the line yourself? Did you discuss it in that context? Do you plan to do that tonight, since the president made the comment, I think, today?
We'll probably bring it up again. I never felt that he went over the line as such. I think it would probably be a good tactical move on his part to say, I'm sorry if anybody took it wrong, but do I think he owes the Cheneys an apology? No.
No.
Can I say something?
Yes, please. So long as it's funny.
Never mind. No. The president was asked in, I guess, the second or third debate, I can't remember which, to name 3 mistakes he had made. Now, this is the President of the United States who comes out of these debates by saying that Kerry was over the line. How about the President of the United States saying, I made a mistake when I told the enemies, our enemies, to attack our boys and, and Gordon's son by saying, bring them on. How about that? How about saying, I made a mistake when I didn't listen to my generals, and because of that, our men and women are dying. How about that? How about that for going over the line?
Okay.
I mean,
Let
the idea
Point of
that
personal
that this is what the president is so outraged about, when he himself can't admit that he made these colossal mistakes in this war that even Senator Lugar, Senator Hagel, and McCain have said that this has just been a disaster.
Okay, you want to go ahead?
Yeah,
Quickly, go ahead.
Bring him on. You don't understand the military culture. The military culture loves that. He understands it, and he fired up his troops that way. And with respect to the...
Just a moment, please.
There's going to be an opportunity for people to ask us questions afterwards, and we'll be happy to address them, all of us. And
They don't love being attacked.
Let's see, the other point you said, what was that, before I was interrupted?
Admitting the mistakes about not sending enough troops in, about not listening to his generals.
That's the general, no, that's the General Shinseki thing. General Shinseki made that comment something like 6 months after he left office. I mean, this whole business about
true.
He was fired.
That
he
is
wasn't
not
fired.
true.
He was not fired.
That is not true.
Guys,
He
we
wasn't
have to
fired.
move on. Please forgive me.
He made it to the Armed
I
Services.
want to move on to the next issue, the Bill O'Reilly sexual harassment issue. Now, he is a major radio and television talk show host. My former student, I have to acknowledge. I would like to know how you are handling that, Gordon Liddy.
Okay, here's something that Al and I both agree on. We both despise Bill O'Reilly. And so, and that being the case,
You're happy to see this happen.
I screen the calls out about him because, you know, if the guy's an enemy, it's bad form to kick him when he's down. So
you haven't touched this
I
story?
have not touched it. I have screened the calls out. People do call.
You
and
have not touched this story?
No.
Supposing it was Al, forgive me for a second, supposing it was somebody like Al Franken. Would you have screened
Well, knowing
it?
Al,
Would
I'd
you?
say he's guilty.
No. Supposing it were a liberal talk show host.
You're claiming this poor Al is
Supposing
not
it
a
were a
liberal?
liberal talk show host, would you also not have dealt with that story?
Look, I don't want to deal with that. But
No, I want to deal with it.
no, I don't want to deal with that on the air. Is what I'm saying. You know,
No,
that's
but
it.
if it were a liberal, would you do the story?
No, and I don't do it. Look,
What you're saying is
Rush
you wouldn't do
Limbaugh
it liberal or
Rush
conservative.
Limbaugh had his problem, right? I haven't dealt with that because he's a competitor, and I just don't do that.
Okay. Jim Bohannon,
Yes.
how did you handle that story?
We haven't discussed it. In fairness, I think we should note that as far as we know, Bill O'Reilly did not supply painkillers to Rush Limbaugh. So give the guy give a little bit of slack.
But
I would, knowing that
trying-
it's strictly a he said, she said type of thing, and
Well,
if
we almost
it came up, I
impeached the
could get
president
into it,
for a
but
he said, she
I'm
said.
not going to generate calls in that direction, frankly. Not at this juncture.
when it was he said, she said at the time of Lewinsky, did you not deal with that either?
Well, we did, but we're talking about the President of the United States.
Yeah, but
too.
you're talking about a major figure now, too.
If it comes up, I'll go with it. I'm not going to push calls in that
Has
direction.
it come up? It's
It has
all over
not
the
come
place.
up. No, it hasn't
No?
come up. No, not yet.
Okay, Al Franken, has it come up on the Al Franken show?
Well, as you may know in the complaint that the woman filed, there is within it she says that he said something amounted to a threat against me and against my family. I went on the next day and I said, look, we had the debate to talk about, and I said we had George Soros on that day. I said, but I obviously have to mention this. There is this lawsuit, sexual harassment lawsuit, and extortion lawsuit. There's no schadenfreude here. This is a sad thing. If it's true, I feel very bad for O'Reilly's wife and the young woman who should never have to go through something like that. And if it's not true, it's a terrible thing that's happening to Bill O'Reilly. And they will either have their day in court or settle it out of court, whatever. So I'm going to take the high road here on the O'Franken factor.
Okay, supposing for a minute, Al, that you were not a party to this in any way, whatever. Would that change your attitude toward using this story as fodder for your program?
It might. Now, because first of all, we don't know what the truth is yet.
Right.
So I think it may be, instead of a he said, she said, a he said, she taped, which may be a little different than he said, she said. I did talk about Rush Limbaugh, because Rush Limbaugh, when my friend Jerry Garcia died, called him just another dead doper. And Rush Limbaugh repeatedly said that anyone who uses drugs illegally should be prosecuted and put away. So there's a little matter of something called hypocrisy. And so, yeah, I've mentioned that. And we'll see how this plays out, and I may comment on it later because there may be a little something called hypocrisy here as well.
How about another story, how about the Sinclair television group and their decision that they're going to run this anti-Kerry documentary, and I'm putting that in quotes because I haven't seen it, so I don't know. Have you?
I haven't seen it either. Okay. So I don't know whether to call it a documentary.
Well, I don't know what to call it either, but it's 45 minutes, and they have acknowledged very critical of Senator Kerry. Is this Sinclair decision, which involves many different issues, not just Senator Kerry, how have you handled that, Jim Bohannon?
I brought it up. We didn't get a whole lot of response about it, honestly. People were still talking about other aspects of the campaign. But I did bring it up. And
what are they talking about, by the way?
We're still talking a great deal about who's right and who's wrong on the basic issues of the campaign. An awful lot of
on the debates or fundamental
the carryovers
differences?
from the debates, yes. Public stances on saying we're still talking about whether Bush was right or wrong, about Kerry flip-flopping. We're talking about stuff that we've been addressing for months and months now.
Okay. Gordon Liddy, what about the Sinclair television decision?
It's come up, but I haven't seen the piece either. When I see it, I'll certainly comment on it. But Sinclair owns the stations, and it's perfectly permissible for them to do so. Somebody made a complaint, I think, to the FCC. The FCC said no problem, and so.
But have you been dealing with it on air?
Very little, because
very little.
You know,
what are the major things that your people are calling in on?
One is that Kerry is an extreme liberal, that we're coming to a fork in the road. We will either continue along the route pioneered by the Founding Fathers, or we will make a hard turn to the left.
To the Founding Fathers, your presumption there, the Founding Fathers, we're going way off to the right, and a Kerry election.
Sort of the Founding Fathers are going, sort of straight ahead.
Ah, okay. Okay. Sinclair television decision. How did Al Franken handle that?
We've talked about it a lot.
Why?
Because it brings up issues like concentration in the media.
Right.
Sinclair is the largest owner of television stations in the country. When Nightline decided to read and show the pictures of all the guys and women who had been killed in Iraq, they refused to show it. They refused to let their stations show it because they said they didn't want something presented as news, but that was really propaganda. I can't imagine, I haven't seen the Swift Boat, the documentary that was produced with the Swift Boat vets for Truth, but I'll bet you it's not a very good piece of journalistic work.
I would go along with
Wouldn't
that
you guess
completely.
that,
Yes, indeed.
Marvin?
I'd guess
Huh.
that as well.
Yeah.
What
Even
are
without
the
seeing it?
what are the major stories that your listeners are raising with you?
Well, we get, first of all, we don't do that many phone calls, but we do enough to, what we talk about a lot is the war in Iraq,
Right.
the run up to it. We talk a lot about Bush's flip-flops because there's so many more than Kerry's. We talk about the 9/11 commission and basically what they said about how this president really ignored terrorism in the lead up to the war. We talk about things like health care, and we talk about what's in people's lives.
Okay.
And especially like the Medicare prescription drug bill, which was filled with, where they extorted people, where they told the Medicare actuary that if he revealed how much money it would cost, they would fire him.
Is this you to your audience or the audience raising questions with
It's
you?
more me to the audience, but
Okay.
it's them back thanking me for raising this.
Okay.
Mr.
Would
Kalb, I have a question.
very
for you.
briefly, because we're running.
You said the Swift boats and everything. Maybe I'm wrong, I haven't seen the piece, but my understanding from news reports is that the Sinclair piece is prisoners of war.
That's right.
Saying how they were tortured to the words of John Kerry. Not
They
Swift boat.
they
not
said,
Swift boat.
my reading of it, they asserted
Yeah, not Swift boat. though.
that they received worse treatment because of things that young Mr. Kerry had said at that time.
Well, young Mr.
That is
Kerry being
that is what they say they said.
a full naval lieutenant at the age
Yeah.
of 27.
Now,
on the
we've
road
got
before
a couple of
Congress.
minutes to go. I appreciate your comment very much. I want to ask you, because you people, given the nature of your job, are in touch with the people, and many of us get to the people in so many indirect ways that I'm not sure that we're with them at all. But who do you think is going to win and why? And on the basis, really, of your feel about what's coming through your headset.
Well, first of all, you can't really judge from all that I hear because talk radio on the AM dial, which is where I am predominantly, tends to be a conservative audience. So what I hear alone would not tell me. But from what I see from the polls and the like, I would guess that Bush will eke out a victory. That's the way the polls seem to be going at this particular time, plus the states that he carried 4 years ago now have somewhat more electoral votes. Bush by a hair.
Gordon Liddy?
I agree, it's going to be a very close race. I'm not at all sure we're going to know on the 3rd of November because of this business of the provisional ballots. There's going to be a lot of legal battles going. I think that eventually Bush will win, and that is a combination of people speaking to me and that I don't think the country is yet ready to go hard left.
Okay, thank you, Gordon Liddy. Al Franken, 20 seconds.
I agree with Gordon that we may not know on the 2nd. I think Kerry will win because ultimately I think this president has squandered his opportunity to unite this country after 9/11 by hijacking it, and I think he's going to go down.
Okay, well, I thank you guys. It's really been fun, but our time is up, and I want to first most sincerely thank our audience who were ready to erupt in laughter at everything that Al said, but I stopped you and I apologize to all of you and to Al Franken as well. I also want to thank our co-sponsors, the George Washington University, the National Press Club, the Shorenstein Center on Press Politics and Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. I want to thank our generous underwriter, the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. And again, I want to thank our terrific panelists, Al Franken, G. Gordon Liddy, and Jim Bohannon, for letting it all hang out. That's it. I'm Marvin Kalb. Good night and good luck, and may the best man win. Thank you.